walking through the park.
By the early 1960s, Motown had Detroit in a chokehold. Berry Gordy's hit machine was polished. It was precise. It was powerful, but not every soul singer fit the Motown mold. Some were too raw, too independent, too Chicago. And for those artists, there was another door. On the south side of Columbia Records empire sat a small historic subsidiary called OKeh Records. It had been around since 1918, home to Louis Armstrong, blues legends, and gospel fire. But in 1963, a sharp A&R man named Carl Davis walked through its doors, changed everything. Davis hired a then-unknown songwriter named Curtis Mayfield as his secret weapon. Together they built something called Chicago Soul. Smoother than Stax, warmer than Motown, drenched in brass, Latin rhythms, and real street poetry. Today, we're counting down 10 soul artists who turned to OKeh Records and found the career or the comeback of their lives. The songs are real, the stories are verified. Let's go. Number 10, The Vibrations, My Girl Sloopy, 1964.
Come on, yeah.
Here's a question most people get wrong. Who recorded Hang On Sloopy first? If you said the McCoys, you're thinking of the version that went to number 1 in 1965.
Hang on, Sloopy, Sloopy, hang on now.
But the original, that belonged to a Los Angeles soul group called The Vibrations. And it wasn't even called Hang On Sloopy. It was called My Girl Sloopy.
Don't try to put my Sloopy down.
The Vibrations had been around since 1955. They started as a high school doo-wop group in LA called the Jayhawks. By the early 60s, they'd already scored a dance hit with the Watusi on OKeh Records. But Checker let them go. They bounced to Atlantic. And it was there in 1964 that they cut My Girl Sloopy, a raw, bongo-driven R&B groove with whooping crowd sounds and a girl named Sloopy who lived in a very bad part of town.
Come on, girl, come on, come on.
The record hit number 26 on the Billboard Hot 100. Not bad, but not the hit it should have been.
Come on, Sloopy, come on, come on.
Then songwriter Burt Burns, the same man behind Twist and Shout, took the Vibrations melody, retitled it Hang On Sloopy, handed it to an Indiana garage rock band called the McCoys, and watched it hit number 1. The Vibrations, they got the credit, they got the royalties, but they didn't get the glory. So they went to OKeh Records. Between 1964 and 1968, they recorded for Carl Davis and Curtis Mayfield, releasing beautifully arranged Chicago soul sides, including a haunting cover of Errol Garner's Miss D that reached number 26 on the R&B chart. The Beatles and I Love Her, northern soul classics that still pack dance floors in England today. And here's the wildest part of their OKeh story. Gamble and Huff, the duo who would later define Philadelphia soul at Philadelphia International Records, co-wrote and produced the Vibrations' Cause Your Mind in 1968 for OKeh's sister label Epic. It was one of their earliest production credits.
Come on, say yeah, yeah, yeah.
The Vibrations never got their Hang On Sloopy moment, but OKeh gave them something better, a body of work that serious soul fans still call essential.
Now, girl, let your hair down, baby.
Number 9, Ted Taylor, Stay Away From My Baby, 1965.
Stay away from my baby.
Ted Taylor had one of the most unusual voices in all of soul music. A piercing, aching falsetto that sounded like a man crying out from somewhere deep inside his chest. Influenced by Little Willie John, Clyde McPhatter, and Jackie Wilson, but somehow more fragile than any of them.
Oh, and I don't mean maybe.
Born Theodore Taylor in Okmulgee, Oklahoma in 1934, he moved to California as a teenager. He joined a gospel group called the Mighty Clouds of Joy.
Well, you can wear my best.
Then a secular doo-wop outfit called the Soul Seekers, who eventually split into two separate recording groups, the Cadets on Modern Records and the Jacks on the RPM subsidiary. Taylor sang on both.
Because you know.
But after years of group recordings and regional hits, Taylor went solo. He bounced between labels for nearly a decade. Melotone, Duke, Warwick, top rank, releasing records that charted locally but never broke nationally.
That's what I believe good friends are really for.
Then Carl Davis signed him to OKeh in 1962. Davis believed in Taylor's voice even when no one else did.
In jail. Well.
He released Taylor's debut OKeh album, Be Ever Wonderful, in 1963. It didn't chart. A second album followed in 1965. Still nothing nationally.
Stay away from my baby.
But then, Stay Away From My Baby, that loping 6/8 groove, Taylor's falsetto riding it like a prayer, climbed to number 14 on the Billboard R&B chart in 1965.
Now.
It was his only national pop chart entry, number 99 on the Hot 100, just barely, but it was enough.
Start getting too friendly with my baby.
OKeh released 3 Taylor albums in total, including a greatest hits collection in 1966.
Don't be maybe. And that's what a friend.
When Davis left the label, Taylor drifted to Jewel Records, then to the Ron label, where he stayed for 7 years and scored several more R&B hits.
That's what I believe good friends are really for.
Tragically, Ted Taylor died in a car accident in Lake Charles, Louisiana in 1987. He was 53 years old.
If you get in trouble.
His OKeh recordings, raw, emotional, utterly distinctive, remain some of the most underheard treasures of the Chicago soul era.
Just call me. And I.
Listen, 90% of you watching these videos right now ain't subscribed yet. If these stories are blowing your mind, imagine what you're missing. Hit subscribe, turn on that bell, and join the R&B fans who never miss a Groove Lens upload. Number 8, The Vibrations' colleague, Otis Leavill, I Love You, 1969. If Major Lance was the star and Curtis Mayfield was the genius, then Otis Leavill Cobb was the invisible glue holding the Chicago soul world together. Born in Dewey Rose, Georgia in 1937, Otis moved to Chicago's West Side as a toddler. His father was a church pastor. His childhood best friend was Major Lance.
We can make it, I love you.
And growing up in the same Cabrini Green neighborhood as Lance, Curtis Mayfield, and Jerry Butler meant Otis Leavill was surrounded by future greatness. He just had to wait his turn. As teenagers, Leavill and Lance boxed together at the gym. They sang together in a group called the Floats. And when Major Lance started climbing the charts at OKeh in 1963, Otis was right there in the building, working as a talent scout and assistant to Carl Davis. And here's what Otis Leavill discovered at OKeh. other people's greatness. He is credited with identifying and helping to develop the Chi-Lites. Tyrone Davis, Hamilton Bohannon, and a young singer named Yvette Stevens, who you know better as Chaka Khan. He passed on her. Somebody else picked her up, but still, the man had ears. As a performer, Leavill released scattered singles throughout the 60s on various imprints: Mercury, Smash, Blue Rock, before Carl Davis formed OKeh Records in 1967 and named Leavill vice president. There, in 1969, Otis Leavill recorded I Love You, written by Eugene Record of the Chi-Lites, with backing vocals by Record and Barbara Acklin. The record climbed to number 10 on the R&B chart, his biggest ever hit. The follow-up, Love Uprising, also written by Eugene Record, reached number 19 R&B and number 72 pop. Not bad for the man who spent most of his career making other people famous. Otis Leavill died of a heart attack in Chicago in 2002. He was 65 years old. The soul world barely noticed, but every artist he ever helped noticed. Number 7, Walter Jackson. It's All Over, 1964. Walter Jackson had one of the most commanding baritone voices in the history of soul music. Deep, resonant, perfectly controlled.
I try to tell you about this song because it's always been...
And he performed from crutches his entire career because childhood polio had left him unable to stand without them.
It's the fact that we're just not going to make it.
Born in Pensacola, Florida in 1938, Jackson grew up in Michigan and began singing in local vocal groups as a teenager.
All the things that we've tried to make work just haven't.
In 1962, Carl Davis discovered him while he was performing at a lounge in Detroit, a city dominated by Motown's assembly line, and persuaded him to move to Chicago.
I'll break her heart, I'm sure. Yet I'll...
Davis signed Jackson to Columbia Records and then transferred him to OKeh, where the magic happened.
Tell my baby, it's all over now.
Jackson's first OKeh hit, It's All Over, was written and produced by Curtis Mayfield and reached number 67 on the Hot 100 in 1964. It wasn't a smash, but it introduced the world to a voice unlike anything else in soul music.
It's all over now. Should I start at false?
What followed was a string of polished, heartbreaking recordings. Suddenly, I'm All Alone, Welcome Home. It's an uphill climb to the bottom. Speak Her Name. Songs with Van McCoy's sophistication, Mayfield's warmth, and Jackson's own devastating emotional delivery.
How can I tell her?
All music called his style Iceman Soul, cool on the surface, absolutely burning underneath. Davis released 3 full Jackson albums on OKeh: It's All Over, Welcome Home, and Speak Her Name. He was one of the few OKeh artists promoted as an album artist, not just a singles machine. Known as the king of smooth Chicago soul,
I've got to find someone to tell my baby.
Walter Jackson scored 16 hits on the American Soul chart and 7 on the pop listings during his OKeh years. He later recorded for Van McCoy's Cotillion and David's Chi Sound label, where he covered Morris Albert's Feelings in 1976 and reached number 9 R&B. He died in Chicago in 1983. He was 45 years old, too young, too unrecognized, and too great to be forgotten. Number 6, Billy Butler, Right Track, 1966. You know the name Jerry Butler, the Iceman, Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, one of the most respected voices in soul history. But here's what most people don't know.
Are you feeling sad and blue?
Jerry Butler's younger brother, Billy, was arguably the better pure soul singer, and he spent the best years of his career at OKeh Records.
I've been trying to reach.
Born in Chicago's Cabrini Green housing projects in 1945, Billy Butler grew up in the same world as Curtis Mayfield, Major Lance, and Otis Leavill.
I believe that I'm on the right track.
He learned guitar at age 12. His mentor, Curtis Mayfield himself. While still in high school, Billy formed a group called the Enchanters and walked into Carl Davis's OKeh office in 1963. Davis signed him immediately.
From a long time ago.
Mayfield supervised the very first session, May 8, 1963, and co-wrote Billy's debut single, Found True Love. Over the next 3 years, Mayfield wrote a string of songs for Billy that are simply gorgeous. Nevertheless, You're Gonna Be Sorry, Does It Matter, records that should have been massive hits but kept getting buried by bad timing and broken radio promotion. Then came the 2 records that defined Billy Butler's legacy. I Can't Work No Longer, a reworking of a Mayfield Impressions track, hit number 6 on the R&B chart in June 1965. His biggest chart success ever. And then Right Track in 1966, an urgent, insistent, up-tempo call to dance that reached number 24 R&B and became one of the most beloved Northern soul records in British dance history. To this day, it still stops floors at all-nighters across England. Billy Butler left OKeh in 1967 and followed Carl Davis to Brunswick Records. He spent the rest of his career in his brother's shadow, playing guitar in Jerry's band, writing songs for others, quietly respected by everyone who truly understood soul music. He died in Chicago on March 31st, 2015. He was 69 years old. The man never got his due, but Right Track will live forever. That's enough. Maybe.
I've been trying to reach my goal too.
Number 5, Gene Chandler, Nothing Can Stop Me, 1965. In 1962, Gene Chandler bought himself a cape, a monocle, a top hat, and a cane, and became the Duke of Earl. His song Duke of Earl sold 1 million copies in just over a month. It spent 3 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard charts. It made him a superstar. And it was released on VJ Records, not Motown, not OKeh, but the Chicago soul label that at one point also distributed the Beatles in America. But stardom came with problems. By 1963, Chandler left VJ and signed with Constellation Records, another Chicago label run by the same tight circle that included Carl Davis and Curtis Mayfield. There, Chandler reconnected with Davis as producer and Mayfield as songwriter, and the results were spectacular. Just Be True in 1964, a top 20 pop hit written by Curtis Mayfield. Nothing Can Stop Me in 1965, another Mayfield original, another top 20 pop hit, dripping with confidence and Chicago brass arrangements. Rainbow, a song Chandler recorded 3 times in his career on 3 different labels, and it became a hit every single time. That's how good it was. When Constellation went bankrupt in 1966, Chandler was simultaneously signed to both Chess Records and Brunswick Records. The 2 labels had to work out an agreement to alternate his releases. One new single from Brunswick, then one from Chess, back and forth. Only Gene Chandler could create a bidding war in bankruptcy. He later became a hitmaker again in the 1970s disco era with Get Down, and is a Grammy Hall of Fame inductee and Rhythm and Blues Foundation Pioneer Award winner. Number 4, Major Lance, 1964.
Walking through the park, it wasn't quite dark.
For a man who sold 5.5 million records, Major Lance is remarkably unknown today. But in 1963 and 1964, he was everywhere.
He just phoned and it made no sense.
Born Malachi Alfonso Lance in Winterville, Mississippi, and raised in Chicago's Cabrini Green projects, Major Lance grew up alongside Curtis Mayfield and Otis Leavill. He was a dancer before he was a singer, a featured performer on Chicago's local TV show, Bandstand Matinee. He recorded one failed single for Mercury in 1959, then spent 3 years working regular jobs while showing up at Carl Davis's OKeh office to offer to run errands, just to stay close to the music. Davis finally signed him in 1962 on Curtis Mayfield's personal recommendation. His second OKeh single, The Monkey Time, hit number 2 on the R&B chart and number 8 pop in the summer of 1963. It was OKeh's first hit single in 10 years. Mayfield had watched a dance craze at a Washington, D.C. gig and wrote the whole thing on the road. The record sold 1 million copies. Then came in January 1964, a Latin-tinted, joyous, impossibly catchy groove that hit number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. 6th song, Pure Genius. Lance followed it with Hey Little Girl, The Matador, Rhythm, Come See, a string of top 40 hits that made him one of the most charted R&B artists of the mid-60s. His backing vocalists on many of these tracks, the Impressions themselves, Curtis Mayfield's own group singing behind his best friend. Major Lance, later recorded for Motown's soul subsidiary, was convicted of drug possession in 1978, lost most of his sight to glaucoma, and died of heart disease in 1994. His daughter, Keisha Lance Bottoms, served as mayor of Atlanta from 2018 to 2022. The Lance legacy lives on, in the music, and in the city his daughter led. Number 3, Little Richard, Poor Dog, Commandments of Love, 1966-67. Here's a story that almost nobody tells. By 1966, Little Richard was lost, not professionally, existentially. He had quit rock and roll in 1957 to become a preacher.
It's the first law of nature.
He came back in 1964, signed to VJ Records, releasing a comeback album while the Beatles were also on VJ. But VJ went bankrupt. He signed to Modern Records. Nothing caught.
Self-preservation.
The British invasion had swallowed the scene he helped create, and Little Richard, the man who invented the shriek, the pompadour, the piano-pounding fire, was looking for a home. OKeh Records came calling in 1966.
Abide by the rules of the one.
The label assigned producer Larry Williams, an old friend from the Specialty Records days, the man who wrote Boney, Maroney, and Short Fat Fanny, and co-producer Johnny Guitar Watson to guide Richard into the Motown-influenced soul era. The result was the explosive Little Richard, released in January 1967. No songs were written by Richard himself. The label pushed horn-driven arrangements over rhythm, and Richard hated it. In Charles White's 1984 biography, Richard said of Larry Williams, "He was the worst producer in the world. He wanted me to copy Motown, and I was no Motown artist. But dig past the frustration, and there are gems."
Now it's a poor dog.
Poor Dog charted at number 41 R&B. Commandments of Love reached number 30 on the Cashbox Black Singles chart. And the live album that followed, recorded at CBS Studios in Hollywood on January 25, 1967, captured Little Richard in full-throated glory, revisiting his classics with the authority of a man who knew he was the original. In his 2 years at OKeh, Richard also toured Britain with Larry Williams, introducing a young guitarist to the stage as part of the touring band. That guitarist's name was Jimi Hendrix. Little Richard left OKeh in 1967. He said the label never gave him the respect he deserved. He was right. But those OKeh records, flawed, fascinating, and absolutely real, are a portal to one of soul music's strangest and most overlooked chapters. Number 2, Walter Jackson's Architect, Barbara Acklin, Love Makes a Woman, 1968. Most people have never heard the name Barbara Acklin, but they have heard her music. They just didn't know it was hers. Born in Oakland, California in 1943, Barbara Jean Acklin moved to Chicago's Bronzeville neighborhood as a small child.
Yes, they were. I had someone.
By age 11, she was singing solos at New Zion Baptist Church. By the time she graduated high school, she was working as a secretary at St. Lawrence Records, just trying to stay close to the music. She sang backing vocals at Chess Records for Fontella Bass, Etta James, and others. Nobody knew her name. Then in 1966, she co-wrote a song with David Scott called Whispers, Getting Louder. Jackie Wilson recorded it. It hit number 5 R&B. Jackie Wilson himself helped her get a recording contract at Brunswick Records, the same orbit as OKeh and Carl Davis's entire Chicago operation. In 1968, Eugene record of the Cheelites, Carl Davis, arranger Sonny Sanders, and guitarist Gerald Sims co-wrote a song for Acklin called Love Makes a Woman. It was issued as the B-side. DJs flipped it over and it exploded. Love Makes a Woman shot to number 3 on the R&B chart and number 15 on the Hot 100 in July 1968. It won a BMI award. It earned Acklin a gold record. But here's the deeper layer. Her 1969 single Am I the Same Girl, which reached 33 R&B, had its backing track repurposed by Carl Davis. Without Acklin's vocals, the instrumental became Soul Stroot by Young Holt Unlimited. That version hit number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 1 in Canada. The same track, 2 different songs, 2 different chart lives. As a songwriter, Barbara Acklin co-wrote Have You Seen Her with Eugene Record in 1971, a multi-million selling hit for the Chi-Lites and one of the most recognizable songs of the early 70s. She died in 1998 at the age of 55, the First Lady of Brunswick, the woman behind some of the greatest Chicago soul records ever made, and almost completely forgotten by the mainstream. Number 1. Johnny Guitar Watson, Gangster of Love, OKeh era, late 1960s. No list of OKeh Records artists is complete without the most dangerous man in the room. Johnny Guitar Watson was not a soul singer who became a bluesman. He was not a bluesman who became a funk star. He was all of those things simultaneously across 5 decades, and he bent every label he ever signed to his own magnificent will.
The local beauty contest for that first place winner.
Born John Watson in Houston, Texas in 1935, he moved to Los Angeles around 1950. His grandfather, a preacher, gave him a guitar on one condition: never use it to play the blues. He used it to play the blues.
Girl to go back to pick up a prize.
By 1953, he was recording for Federal Records. By 1956, he had cut 3 hours past midnight for RPM, a slow burn blues guitar workout so staggering that Frank Zappa reportedly played it on the jukebox 3 times every single lunch hour. Zappa later said Watson's 3 hours past midnight inspired him to become a guitarist. In 1957, Watson recorded Gangster of Love on OKeh Records. It didn't chart. He didn't care. The song was so cool, so loaded with swagger, that Steve Miller covered it in 1968 and then referenced it again in Space Cowboy in 1969 and again in The Joker in 1973. Some people call me the Gangster of Love. That line, Johnny Guitar Watson's. By the mid-1960s, blues had cooled and soul was hot. Watson didn't fight the change. He walked right into it. He signed to OKeh Records in the late 60s, working with producer Larry Williams, the same Williams who tried to modernize Little Richard, and also recording alongside Watson's old friend and touring partner. The OKeh material showed Watson in full transition, from Texas blues gunslinger to slick West Coast urban soul artist. It wasn't his commercial peak, but it was the bridge. Because in 1976, Watson signed to DJM Records, reinvented himself again as a flamboyant funk star, started wearing gold teeth and enormous hats, and released A Real Mother for Ya in 1977, an R&B top 10 hit that made him a legend to an entirely new generation.
Watson in a very new voice. I said, yes, I brush him.
He died on stage in Yokohama, Japan on May 17, 1996, mid-performance of a heart attack. That is how a Gangster of Love leaves the building. His influence extends from Etta James to Jimi Hendrix to Sly Stone. Bobby Womack called him the most dangerous gunslinger out there. Jimmy Vaughn said he and Stevie Ray looked up to Watson like a god.
Down the street, walking down the street.
The OKeh chapter was just one moment in a career that defied every category. But it matters, because OKeh is where the gangster learned to wear a suit.
I'm walking down the streets.
OKeh Records gave these artists something Motown never could. Room. Room to be raw. Room to be real. Room to be themselves. And what they made in that room is still playing on dance floors 60 years later. These are the stories history almost forgot. Now you know them. If this hit different, like the video, subscribe, and drop your favorite OKeh Records song in the comments. Thanks for watching.
Cutie pies, cutie pies, cutie pies.